Kumlen and Ablat Gemara. We are up to now the seventh Perek of Masechta Yevamos. We're up to the Samach Vov Amud Aleph, and we're now in the second half of Masechta Yevamos. So, as an introduction to understand what's going on over here is, when a woman gets married to her husband, she brings in sometimes assets with her. She might bring in properties with her, and exactly how does it work during her marriage? What happens to these properties? So there's two kinds of properties that she brings in. One is known as nichse meloig, which literally means plucked properties, and one is nichse barzel, assets which are like iron, steel, and sheep, and they don't budge. And this is how it works. Nichse meloig is when she brings in properties to the estate, and she says the property still belongs to me, but you take care of it while we are married. And if he passes away or they get divorced, she takes it right back, whatever state it's in. To give him an incentive to work hard on these properties, he gets all the dividends. But he takes full responsibility for the properties. If it goes down the value, if he ruins it, whatever it is, he's totally responsible. And if it goes up and down, it's all hers. That's called nichse meloig, which means the property, even while staying with the husband, belongs to her. It's just that the dividends go to him. Then you have nichse barzel, which we sometimes call dowry, which basically they quantify the value of the property at the time of the marriage, and they put it into the ksuba. They include it in the ksuba, and they write that this property here is being given to the husband, and at a value, let's say $1,000. And if he passes away, or if he divorces, then he has to pay her that amount of money, regardless of whether the property goes up in value or it decreases in value. That's the fixed amount he has to give. So we say that, that while they're married, the property is considered his. Nitzah Barzel is totally his, because he's fully responsible. Any loss of thing is his loss or his gain. So that's as if it's his property. That's basically the two kinds of assets. Now, we're also going to learn that if a woman, Yisrael, marries a Kohen, she's entitled to eat truma. And not only she's entitled to eat truma, but if she brings in, if she has servants, the servants are also entitled to eat truma, because they're her, even though it's her servant, let's say it's nichse meloig, which are hers, nevertheless they're entitled to eat truma. We learn from a pasuk. And nichse barzel are entitled to eat truma because they're really his. While they're married, they're considered his. So nichse meloig is considered hers, nichse barzel is considered his. Here we're going to talk about, interesting that the Mishnah, before it tells you the rule about a Yiddish woman marrying a Kohen, it already starts off the negative way. Somebody who's forbidden to marry a Kohen or a Kohen Gadol, and what happens to her servant. So it says the Mishnah, Amana le Kohen Gadol, if a widow marries a Kohen Gadol, but it's forbidden, or a Grusha, a Chalutza Ben Hegyed, or if a divorcee, or a Chalutza marries an ordinary Kohen, and so they're in a way they're living in sin, but the marriage is a full marriage. It depends. Hechnisa loy. There's two possible ways of her bringing in these assets. Either avdei meloy. These servants are like avdei meloy, which means they belong to her, but he has use of them, and he gets all the dividends, everybody else all the input. So those servants are considered technically hers. And then you have avdei tzom barzel, where they work out an amount, they quantify an amount, put that into the ksuba. So those avodim are his. Now the Mishnah delineates further. Avdei meloig, if it's avdei meloig, literally meloig means plucked. Like a chicken is plucked, the chicken remains. All you do is take off the feathers, but the chicken remains the same. These assets belong to her, but he takes off the feathers, the dividends, and the incentive to work on it. Avdei meloig lo yochlu b'truma. If it's avdei meloig, so she's living in sin. Even though she might be able to eat truma, she cannot pass it on to her servants. Her servants cannot eat truma whatsoever. And so. And why? Because she became a halala. Now that she married a Kohen Gadol, she became a halala, which therefore, if you would have had children, for example, they wouldn't be Kohenim, so her servants are not allowed to eat. I'll explain why. But Avdei Tzom Barzel, if it's his avadim, Yechlu, they can eat. Because the fact is, he's a Kohen, he's not a halal, so therefore they can eat. And he explains what exactly are avdei meloig in meisoi. If, let's say, they die, meisu loss, her loss. And if they, let's say, increased in Haisila, it's her gain. In other words, they belong technically to her, it's her servants. Even though the husband, while they're there, he has to take care of them, provide for these servants, and he gets the benefit of their work, but he has to take care of them, nevertheless, they're hers. They should not eat truma. The Elohein Avdei Tzom Barzel, what are considered the servants of slaves of a Tzom Barzel, like iron. So they're technically his. So if they die, Mesa is his loss. He still has to pay. Let's say they worked out it's $1,000 slave. If they die during that time, too bad on him. He still has to pay her out $1,000. In other words, who owns the slave? He does. If he increase the value, whatever it is, it's his gain. Because he's totally responsible. So now, note that the Gemara will talk about later. The Mishnah doesn't say that because it's his. It says because he's totally responsible. Now we go to an ordinary case. Bas Yisrael, a Jewish woman, she married a Kohen. She brought in a number of servants with her into the marriage. It doesn't matter whether they're considered Maloig or Tzrein Basel. If she's a Yisrael, Bas Yisrael, who's allowed to marry a Kohen, and she can eat Truma, she can pass on also that right to her servants. Even if the servant belonged to her, she had the right to pass it on. Had Eli to eat Truma. Ubas Kohen. What about the daughter of a Kohen who was entitled to eat Truma until she married Yisrael? Married Yisrael. As soon as she married Yisrael, she forfeits her right to eat Truma. And while she was unmarried, her servants were able to eat Truma, but now that she married Yisrael, the Avadim brought in servants again. Makes no difference between Abdim Meloim and Abdim. Even Abdim Meloim, when it belonged to her, she's a Bas Kohen. It doesn't matter. Since she lost her right to eat Truma, now that she's married to Yisrael, so to her servants. They cannot eat Truma. Says the Gemara, let's understand this whole Mishnah. These Avdei Meloi, Lo Yechlu B'Truma. You tell me that Avdei Meloi, in the case where it's in sin, they cannot eat Truma. And my question is, why not? The fact is that now that they're married, so it's as if the Kohen has a kinyan in these servants, so why shouldn't they eat? The time we learn. The Kohen marries a woman, and bought slaves, servants. I don't know that the Kohen can pass on the right to eat Truma to his wife or to pass it on to Avodim. So it says the Kohen can eat the nefesh, that he has the right, that if he makes an acquisition, he has the right to feed them Truma. I know that if his wife, let's say she was a Bas Yisrael who married this Kohen, I know that if she, let's say, purchased slaves from her Nichsim Malek, she owns the properties, and she purchased slaves from Nichsim Malek, or Avad Dov Shekon Avadim. Let's say the slaves of a Kohen buy other slaves. Now, how do slaves have any money to be able to buy others? Somebody gave him a gift and said on the condition that your master has no share in it. So then the master has no share in it, as Rashi explains. So they bought. How do you know that extends even the next link? It says the Kohen Nefesh Kinyan Kaspi. These words Kinyan Kaspi is extra. Just say the Kohen makes an acquisition. Why does it say Kinyan Kaspi? That even if they go ahead and they add another layer, also they're entitled to Kinyan Noi, if his Kinyan. Shekona Kinyan Oichel. That if the servants they buy other servants, or his wife buys other servants in Malay, they're also entitled to Truma. And the rule is Kola Oichel Meichel. If they themselves are entitled to, for example, the wife is entitled to Truma because she's married to a Kohen, then she has the right to pass it on to her servants. And Kol She'ein Oichel Meichel, but if you yourself cannot eat, then you cannot pass it on. So let's say the Almona marries a Kohen Gadol, she's a halala, so therefore she cannot pass it on to her servants. Says no, you're telling me because she cannot eat, therefore she cannot pass it on. Let me ask a question about the Odol. You have a Kohen who's an Odol, who's uncircumcised. Even if it's for a valid reason that his brothers were hemophiliacs and they've all died under the knife, under the bris, by the bris. And therefore, according to Loch, he has to remain an Odol. Nevertheless, this Odol, the Chol HaTmei, and any Kohen who's tamei, and while they are tamei, they cannot eat truma. So the question is, during that period, can let's say, their wife eat truma? Because since the Kohen himself cannot eat truma, maybe he cannot pass on during that week or that time, the short term, she cannot eat either. The din is that they can continue eating. So your principle you just gave that if the Kohen himself cannot eat, cannot pass it on. So if the wife, for example, lives in sin with the Kohen, so she cannot eat truma. Therefore, her servants also cannot eat truma. Is not correct. So what are you comparing it to? Hasam Pumaya Koila. Really, the Kohen is technically able to eat truma. There's a side issue here that he can't because the Kohen is tamei, because the Kohen is uncircumcised. But as a Kohen, he could eat truma. Here, she cannot eat truma because she's now a halala. So it's not a side issue. That's who she is, and therefore she cannot pass on the right to her servants. So what about a mamzer? An interesting case. You have, let's say, a Bas Yisrael, a Jewish girl who marries a Kohen, and they had a daughter. Now, the law is that if a Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen, she can eat Truma. If the Kohen dies, then she no longer has a right to Truma. But if she produces children, then because of her, on account of her children, since she brought Kohenim into the world, she can go ahead and she can continue Truma. If she, let's say, had a daughter, and then the daughter married a mamzer and had a son. So now all she has is a grandson who is a mamzer. And so let's say the daughter died, and the only connection that you have here to the Kohen's family is a grandson who happened to be a mamzer. And the din is that she can eat truma because of him. Why? The fact is she had children from a Kohen. Doesn't matter the grandson is a mamzer. The fact is she had a child from a Kohen, and therefore she can eat. Now, the truth of the matter is, it makes no difference if the child is a mamzer. It's irrelevant. The fact is, a mamzer could have been her daughter married a Yisrael and now had a grandson. And the finish is that she can still eat truma even though her daughter died. She can, and the husband died. She can still continue eating truma because the grandson who is a Yisrael. Because the fact is that this grandson came from a Kohen as well. But just so happened to be the Mishnah that talks about mamzer, so we mentioned mamzer. But that part really is irrelevant. So now the question is, now this grandson cannot eat truma because he's a Yisrael, and yet a Meichel, and yet the grandmother can eat because of him. So you see that your rule is incorrect. Kinyan oichel kamar. We're talking about where it's an acquisition. A grandson that's in the genes is biological. So therefore, when it's biological, and the idea is that the kohen, that a child is left, there's a child from this kohen, doesn't matter that the child is a grandson who happens to be Yisrael, and that's a biological fact. Therefore, the mother can eat. We're talking about where there's no biological connection, merely through a kinyan. And therefore, if she herself cannot eat, nor can her servants. Kinyan oichel kama. But about kinyan oichel meichel shein oichel meichel. It comes to kinyan only if she herself can eat, then she has the capacity to pass it on. But if she cannot eat, can't. When it comes to biological, it doesn't matter. If the grandson is a Yisrael, the fact is it came from a kohen, and if the grandmother can eat. Rava says, so that's one answer. Rava comes along and says, no, I would say, midaraisa meichel ochli. I would say mahatayra, she actually can eat. But Rabbanon who gozer by Rabbanon, you're right. The servants can eat. You don't need this rule that you yourself have to eat to be able to pass it on. Not necessarily so. The servant would be, even though she cannot eat, the servant should be able to eat. So why is it the law in the Mishnah says that the servant cannot eat in a case which is a legal marriage? So he says in the Raisa they could eat, but Rabbanon who goes, but on the rabbis that came in and then stepped in. Kadesha Tamer, in order she should say, wow. I cannot eat. Even my slaves who are innocent, they cannot eat. That must be because I'm living in an illicit relationship, and maybe this will make her alert her to the fact that she's living in sin, and that maybe then therefore she will leave the marriage, exit this marriage. That's why it's done. Rav Ashi says similar, but he says gzeida. You're right. From the Torah perspective, you could pass on the slaves, but we're also worried about something else. And therefore she can't. And what is that? They were talking about, let's say, this widow could be a Bas Kohen herself. And she married, let's say, or she was a divorcee, a Bas Kohen, and she married a Kohen. If we can allow her and she's a halal now, and if we can allow her, and she couldn't eat truma while she's married to a kohen because she's a halal. If we can allow her to feed her servants, she's going to think that even my husband died, I can continue eating. Why? She'll say, my first husband was alive, I ate truma. Before I married my first husband, I ate truma. After my first husband died, I went back to my family, I continued eating truma. Now my second husband was alive. Maybe that now that he died, I can continue giving my servants truma. So he says, then we're continuing after Misa. So you might have saw El Me'ato, then even a Bas Yisrael should have a Kohen. Forget about a Bas Kohen. What about if you're worried that what's going to happen after the Kohen's demise? So what happens if a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, which before she was married, she was not allowed to eat truma. Now that she was married, she ate truma. Like Teichel, maybe she shouldn't feed her servants any truma. So why aren't you worried that she'll continue feeding them after her husband dies? If you're worried about the continue, then continue as well. And what Rashi? We're talking about Amona Kehenis. We are talking about a widow that she herself was a Bas Kohen. The Asila Aruya, she's going to convince herself that maybe she can continue feeding her slaves only in this case. Why is that? Mikari ochla b'truma de beinosha. When she left her first husband, her servant continued eating truma because she was a bas kohen. If we're going to allow the servant to continue eating truma while she is married to the kohen, even though she herself can't because she's living in sin. But if her servant continue eating while she's married to the second husband, is the gavroi v'hashta hadul l'musik. She'll think, well, the second cousin, the kohen died. These servants can continue eating because I remember after my first husband died, they continued eating truma legally. So she thinks after the second husband, since during the second husband's life they were eating truma, they can continue afterwards. That's the problem. Well, Yada, she didn't realize the first time around, she was not living in sin, she was not a chalala. Therefore, even after the husband died, she went back home to her family, and the servants were eating on account of her. Now that she married, you should see divorcee, she married a kohen, which is almana, and married a kohen gadol. She herself became a chalala, so she herself has no longer a right to eat truma. Therefore, she cannot pass it on to the children, to the slaves. Says the Gemara, okay, it all makes sense. Almana kehenes, if she's a widow kehenes, she might make this mistake. But Almana basisol, if she's a basisol, she won't make this mistake, this error in judgment. So why can't she feed the truma to the slaves while she's married to a kohen? She won't convince herself that after the kohen done, I can continue feeding. You know that you no longer have a kohen in your life, and you're a basisol. She won't make that mistake. You're right. If the Gemara found it too difficult to make distinctions, all almanas, and that's it. Easy that way. We learned okay, so here's a very fundamental question regarding Nichsit and Barza. So we assessed, let's say, this particular land. We said that this land is worth $1,000. You put that, incorporate that in the Ksuva. It's now Nichsit and Barzel. It's his property, and whatever it's worth at the time of the, let's say, the divorce or when he dies, that's what you had to take out of the estate, $1,000. Doesn't matter, regardless of the value of the field. The question is, but what happened at this stage? You said, you know what? I want the field back. Here I met her. She says, "Kailai ani no tell us. I want to take my field back. And it's mine." And he says, no, we put it in the thing, it's my field, I owe you $1,000, and that's it. In me, hadin in me. So who's right? Rabbi Yehuda says, hadinima. At the end of the day, it's her asset, and therefore she says, I want it back. And she just has to pay him the difference. So for example, the asset now is worth $1,500, and he only owes $100,000, she has to pay the $500. But she has a right to claim it back, because it's hers. Rabbi says, no, you forfeited any rights to the property. When you put that in the ksuva, it became totally his. Very fundamental argument regarding Nichsit and Barzel after the demise of the husband. Whose is it? With her, because it's a pride to her family that they own this house, they own this particular property, and therefore, if now it's the husband no longer around, it should go back to the family estate. And the law is with him. Since we learned it says clearly in the Mishnah, im meisu, let's say we're servants, and they died, meisu, it's his loss. Im haisida, the value of the servant went up. Haisida, it's his gain. In other words, it seems from the Mishnah clearly that it's his, it belongs to the husband. Because he's responsible, therefore he should eat it. Omar Rab Safra, so your whole basis of the Mishnah, if you were Rab Amis, the whole basis that belongs to his husband completely, even after, let's say, they divorce, and he says, I want the field, it stays with the husband, or if he dies, it goes to the heirs. And your whole basis of Mishnah, I would say from the Mishnah as a proof actually does the opposite. Because what's the Mishnah's wording? Omar Rab Safra, Miktani, does our Mishnah say the reason why whether it goes up in value or decrease in the value, it all goes to the husband? Does it say because it's his? Does it say Behein Shalei, it's his? It says Hoil B'chai B'achruzik Tani. It's only because he's responsible. On the contrary, the fact that we say it's his responsible sounds like it's not really his, just that he took on a full responsibility and therefore he has gains or losses. Really, in fact, it's not his. Says the Gemara, forget the wording in the Mishnah. Let's talk about the principle. That you're going to tell me that you're going to interpret the Mishnah that's not really the husband, it's only his responsibility. What is the result of the Mishnah saying that it's his responsibility, that he feeds the avodim? The avodim can eat, even though he's married illicitly, it's his slaves and he can eat. Doesn't that tell you itself that it belongs to the kohen? Because it didn't really belong to the kohen, it was only his responsibility. He cannot then feed them. I'll prove it to you. If all it is that he's totally responsible, that gives him the right to pass on the right to truma. Let me ask a question. But now we learn Yisrael, a Yid, Shasacha Parayid, hired a bull, Mekoyin from a kohen. The bull belongs to a kohen, and a Yid came along and hired it, which takes the responsibility. It gets stolen or lost, he's totally responsible. The law is Harei Ze Yachilenu Kashini Truma. He can still continue feeding the animals animal fodder that has truma, which is far cheaper than that, because it technically still belongs to Kohen. Even though the Yisrael is responsible, doesn't make it the Yisrael. He's just responsible for a Kohen's cow. So you can feed the Kohen's cow with truma. What about the other way around? Kohen hired a bull from a Yid. Even though he's responsible, he has to take care of the animal, but it's not his. It still belongs to Yisrael. So clearly from here we see it's based on responsibility. It doesn't in any way make it yours. It doesn't give the right to truma. Says the Gemara that the Gemara says there are levels of responsibility. The level of responsibility that the Kohen has, the level of responsibility that this Kohen has to to the animal is not the same thing as the responsibility the Kohen has for the assets that the wife brings into the state. But Tizbra may ask a question. True that you are liable. You're when it comes to what do you call it, a shamer. Somebody hires something, you're responsible for loss of theft. But if there was an accident, for example, you're exempt. Or if let's say he gets weaker, the animal, or the depreciation, it's not your responsibility. No, it's not yours. You're just a hirer, and you're just responsible for things that are like slight negligence. So that's not full responsibility. If you want to bring a simile to our Mishnah, the husband or the wife, where he takes full responsibility, I'll give you an example, and you'll see that he does feed truma. For example, let's say if you want to compare it to the end of the Mishnah, if Yisrael then goes ahead and assesses the value of the animal from a kohen, so now it's considered, if he sells to the kohen, the animal is $500, and I'm going to give you back $500. So then it now is treated as if it belongs to the Yisrael, and he can no longer feed the truma. The other way around, if a kohen, let's say, assess the value of an animal, give it a value when he hired from him, and basically he said to him that I am going to return to you an animal. I bought you, I rented to you an animal worth $500. I'm going to return to you an animal worth $500. So if it decreases or increases the value, or if it's a decrease in value, or an accident happens, or something happens, I will reimburse you the difference. So there, it's a full responsibility. And there we say, if a kohen did it, the kohen could give truma. So we see that full responsibility makes it the kohen. The same thing in our Mishnah, that the husband now is has a what do you call full responsibility, and so therefore there's no proof in our Mishnah. So so this follows Rabbi Yehuda. Really does not belong to the kohen. The wife can say, I want it back. Why can he feed him truma? Because he has such a responsibility of appreciation and so on, that's considered, as far as truma is concerned, the kohen's, and he can feed the servant's truma, even though he's married illicitly to this woman. But it's not really his. Rabbi Lebeis was saying at the end of the shir of Rabbi Nachman, the Yashiga was saying, the Tanya goes, we found a brayso that supports Rabbi Yehuda, that says it's still hers, that she can take it back. And the Tanya goes, we found another brayso that learns like Rabbi that it's his, and she cannot take it back. Tanya goes, where do we learn Rabbi that it's his? It says clearly, Avdei Tzoim Basel. We know the law is that if you have an Eved Kanani, you're not supposed to set them free. But if you knock out their tooth, or gouge out an eye, you have to set them free. So the Avdei Tzoim Basel, if the Avodim are Tzoim Basel, that means they belong to him, to the man. Then Yotzin b'Sheva Ayil Ish, it goes out to Sheva Ayil. If the husband knocked out a tooth, or the husband, let's say, blinded one eye of the servant, so then because it's considered his servant, and the law is if it's your servant, set him free. But if the wife, even though initially was her servant, but now she gave it over to him. If the wife knocked out a tooth, then it's not hers. He doesn't go free. You have to compensate him, but he doesn't go free. So what do we see clearly from here? We treat them as whose servants are they? Totally the husband, and the wife relinquished her ownership. That supports the view of Rabbi Ami. However, Tani, when the beauty goes in the brayso like Rabbi Yehuda, that's still hers. It says, what happens? They worked out, Tzoim Basel, they worked out a price. Let's say on a property, if the husband wants to sell, if the husband wants to sell, he can't sell. In other words, it's not his; it's still hers. Furthermore, I feel even if he in return, set aside a property and said this property is as I guess a lien for your property. Still, he cannot sell. Because it's not, at the end of the day, the asset is not his. She can say, I want it back. She can say, I want it back. Mochrush name, let's say if either one of them turned around and actually sold it, so they needed it, let's say, for a livelihood. So you might say, well, this actually happened to Lil. They took the term out, so either the wife or the husband sold it. So the Bryce is going to say that neither of them had a right. The husband had no right because it's not his. The wife had no right because at the moment she allowed the husband to work with it. And it says, Habal he went along and said that if he sold the property without her knowledge, and then this is Rashi's version, Tosfos agrees, and then he died, the wife can go and take the property right back because the husband had no right to sell it. It's not his property. Clearly, it's the wife's. Tosfos says that she could even do it while the husband was alive. Yet, if he had no right to sell it, why wait till he dies? Even when the husband's alive, she has the right to come in and say, "Give it back to me." And Rashi goes further, that even the husband himself, if the wife, let's say, predeceases him, he has the right to go back to the person who bought it from him that he sold, say, give it back to me. Now that I'm standing in the place of my wife, I could take it right back. So what does he clear from here? The property is still the wife's. The Rabbi first said, name Rav Nachman, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that the asset still, after the husband dies or divorces, it goes back to her if she wants it. So Rabbi said to Rav Nachman, after he's declared that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, I still don't understand. He says, well, Tanya didn't believe the Braisa, Kavos Rabami like Rabami, that the property is not his. So Gemara says, Tanya goes Rabami, even though we look at Rabami, Mistabra, it makes more sense, time with the Rabbi Yehuda, the logic of Rabbi Yehuda. Even though Rabami we have a Braisa, but it makes more sense. Rabbi Yehuda says that the asset at the end of the day still belongs to her, even though they make it a fixed asset. Because it's really a pride of her family and therefore belongs back in her family as one of their assets. Hayita, there's a woman, the Ayla Gabra, that she brought into the marriage to her husband. Itztala, the Milsa, beautiful little cloak. Big Suvasa, and they put it in the Ksuba, and they wrote down the value and everything else. Shachiv. So now we just pass on the local of Yehuda that after Shachiv, the husband dies, if she wants, she says, don't give me the fixed value, I want the coat back. Shaklu Yasma, what happened was the heirs jumped in, Uporsua Misna, they used it to cover the deceased. Now we have a rule that anything that is involved with a mace, that comes, let's say was used for a mace, is also bahana. So the question here was, what happened? Amar Rabba says, Rabba, Kanye Misna, he ruled that now the cloak is with the maid. She wanted it back, and she said, you had no right to cover my husband with it, and but they did it. So Rabba said, too late. The son of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabba, the grandson of Rabba, said to Rav Kana when he heard about this halacha, he said about my grandfather, did my grandfather Rabba say the halacha that it's still hers, so therefore she can take it back. Amalei, he said, you're right. However, Rabbi Yehuda will have to concede that even though she has a right to take it back, but till she takes it back, it's not in her possession. It's in the possession of the husband or his heirs. The mechusik abayna is still lacking the collecting. The collection still has to take place, which means right now, who's holding on to it? The heirs. The kivin the mechusik abayna, and the fact is, right now she didn't collect it yet. She didn't enforce the law. The shu say, it's by them. So, and they put it around the mace. So what? So why can't you take it back? Because the Rabbi himself said, Rabbi said there are 3 instances where even though you committed something, you put a lien on something, but factors later can change it all around. What are they? Dama Rabbi, we had this on a few occasions. Rabbi said, we had and so on. Rabbi said, we had it before as well. Rabbi said, Hegdish, that let's say if you go ahead and take something, you sanctify something called kedushas haguf. You say that this animal itself, for example, should become totally holy. So you let's say you said you're going to give this animal is going to go to my lender, and then you go ahead and you decide to make it hegdish. That it completely unravels any ties it has to the lender. Same thing here. Even though the property has to go back to the wife, by putting it around the mace, which is asavano, which is like the case of chametz. That's it. Once it comes to asavano, it unravels any connections that have to her. Because at the time, the children they still had in their possession, they could do it. Chametz, for example, if a guy lent $100 to a yid, and he gave him some bottles of whiskey, but he didn't put it in the guy's house. Because he put it in the guy's house, we had in our Pesachim, it's called Hidhinu Etzla. You left it in the guy's house, it's all right after Pesach. But you left it in your own house, but you committed it to the guy. So you can argue it's not my chametz over Pesach with the guys, and therefore after Pesach I'm allowed to drink from it. And we say no, that comes along chametz on Pesach, the Isur Hanoah, and cuts off that connection to the guy. It becomes like chametz in the Jew's house, and it's forbidden after Pesach. Same over here. The mace is also bahana, and therefore it cuts off the wife's connection to it. And the same thing is because it's sitting in the Yid's house. And the same thing is, but if we're seeing the guy's house, then it's no longer mechusa gevaina. There's no longer a collection that has to be done. Sitting right there in the guy's house as a security. So then we say it's different. And the last case is v'shichur. If let's say, for example, if a yid said to the lender, "I'm getting this eved is going to be my security," and then the borrower went ahead and set free this eved, it's no longer security for the loan. And in more than security, even if you say you can take your payment from the servant when the time comes up. Mafkim de shiva, it cancels any connections. Okay, so therefore we rule that it belongs. It's at the end of the day, it's a wife's estate. One, and she has the right to collect it back, but it has to collect it before it becomes completely hers. Amar Buda will just go to the Mishnah. Let's say she brought in 2 kalim and fixed the price the elazuz for $1,000. She said that these two together are worth $1,000. Put that in the ksuva, and he has to give it back to her if they divorce, or he predeceased her. Got to give back $1,000. But what happened with Shavchi? It increased the value. There's inflation. But now each keli is worth $1,000. Together, they're worth $2,000. And she said, I want it back. Is so she gets one back as she's offered $1,000. So they give her back one of them, and it's the value of $1,000. So that was a fixed asset, but there's still one more, and she wants it back. The echad they send is damim v'neitlasa. The other one she has to pay for. You have the right to take it back, but you have to pay the value now, which is $1,000. Yipnei shevach beisavir. But why does she have the right to take it back? Because it's a pride of the family possessions. They want it back. Micah Mashlam, what are you trying to teach? That she has the right to take it back. We already said before. Before the whole argument, whether you can take it back or not. What are you introducing here new that we didn't know before? No. So Gemara says, I would have thought, I would have thought that when does she have a right to take it back if it's still the same value as it was originally in the ksuva? So she said, well, it's still $1,000 for 2 of them. Give it back to me. I will make them dummy, but can she force them to give it back to him and she'll pay the difference? I would have thought that's very different. It's no longer part of the ksuba. It's like it's a new transaction. How can she enforce it? That she has every right to take it back. Okay, have a good day.